At a recent North Sea summit hosted in Germany, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen delivered a forceful message. She asserted that the European Union must achieve a complete and final end to all imports of fossil fuels from Russia. The Prime Minister characterized Europe's long-standing reliance on Russian energy as a profound historical mistake. In her view, the continent's objective should not be limited to merely breaking free from Russian energy. It must extend to avoiding any future dependence on any non-European nation. This declaration sounds bold, a powerful call for European self-reliance. However, these words clash directly with the unfolding reality on the ground. The European Union consistently criticizes its dependence on Russian gas as a dangerous strategic risk and a direct threat to its security. Yet at this very moment, Europe is embracing another, deepening form of dependence, a reliance on liquefied natural gas, or LNG, imported from the United States. The central paradox is striking. When Russian gas was inexpensive and flowed through established infrastructure, it was labeled as a dangerous dependence. But now, expensive American LNG, which requires transatlantic shipment and drives up costs significantly, is framed as diversification of supply. The standard appears to be fluid, raising a fundamental question about the nature of power in international relations. Is the European Union genuinely pursuing strategic independence, or is it merely swapping its dependence on Russia for a new dependence on the United States? If reliance on a non-European superpower is indeed a mistake, why is dependence on Russia so vehemently condemned, while dependence on the United States is cloaked in the language of shared values, alliances, and collective security? This exposes the core contradiction of modern Europe. It speaks the language of independence, but its actions reveal a more sophisticated and perhaps more binding form of dependence. This is the great unanswered question that the European Union has not yet dared to confront honestly. This pattern of contradictory logic is not accidental or temporary. It is the direct consequence of a political leadership class characterized by inconsistent and often conflicting strategic thinking. This dynamic has led some observers to mockingly refer to the five dragons of the European Union, a group of figures known for their staunchly anti-Russian positions. This includes former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who, after overseeing the construction of the very infrastructure that deepened Germany's reliance on Russian gas, pivoted to condemn that same policy near the end of her tenure. It also includes figures like Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who is distinguished by her sharply confrontational rhetoric in Moldovan, President Maia Sandu, who appears willing to steer her nation into a confrontational posture in pursuit of potential European Union membership. Perhaps no single statement has better captured this disconnect between political rhetoric and strategic reality than one made by German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock. She famously stated that security for Ukraine could not be guaranteed unless Russia changed its policy by 360 degrees. This phrase quickly became a symbol of the confusion plaguing European strategic thought, as a 360-degree change, by definition, means returning to the original starting point. This was more than a simple linguistic slip. It reflected a much deeper issue. Many leaders within the European Union are approaching complex geopolitical challenges with a framework dominated by emotion and moralization. Rather than one grounded in national interests and pragmatic reality, Russia is no longer analyzed as a geo-economic actor whose relationship must be managed. It has been transformed into a symbol of absolute evil, a narrative tool used to mobilize public opinion. When political strategy is built upon symbols instead of cold calculation, policy decisions inevitably become distorted. This environment gives rise to a characteristic form of hypocrisy. Leaders speak of independence, strategic autonomy, and the imperative of not being held hostage by energy suppliers. Simultaneously, they sign long-term contracts for American LNG, accepting higher prices, greater logistical risks, and a deeper integration into a financial and security infrastructure dominated by the United States. The dependence on Russia is treated as a moral failing, a sin to be expunged. The dependence on the United States, however, is presented as the virtuous fulfillment of an alliance. In essence, the structural condition of dependence remains unchanged. Only the flag of the dominant partner has been swapped. Within this broader European context, Denmark emerges as a quintessential, even extreme, example of this dual policy of confronting Russia while aligning completely with the United States. Denmark's national security posture has been intricately tied to the American protective umbrella since the end of the Second World War. Inside the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Copenhagen has consistently played the role of the exemplary junior partner. It asks few questions, takes decisive action, and is often at the forefront of campaigns initiated by Washington. This dynamic is most clearly visible in its level of assistance to Ukraine. When measured as a percentage of its gross domestic product, Denmark ranks among the top European contributors. This is not merely symbolic support. Denmark has transferred a significant portion of its existing military capabilities, including F-16 fighter jets, 155mm artillery systems, tanks and armored vehicles, alongside financial aid packages valued in the tens of billions of euros. This is an all-in commitment, the behavior of a frontline ally. The price of this loyalty, however, is most starkly exposed in the case of Greenland. Nominally, Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. In reality, it is a strategic space where the United States has maintained a significant military presence for decades, encountering virtually no political resistance from Copenhagen. When a former American president publicly expressed interest in purchasing Greenland, the Danish government offered a formal objection but possessed no real leverage to alter the underlying strategic reality. Sovereignty exists on paper, but effective strategic control resides with its powerful ally. This reveals the ultimate paradox. Denmark, like many of its European peers, opposes Russia in the name of sovereignty and independence. Yet it simultaneously trades away significant portions of its own strategic autonomy in exchange for American security guarantees. This is a strategic choice, and its long-term consequences are something that Europe will, sooner or later, have to confront on its own. Indeed, if Denmark is the exemplary junior partner to the United States within NATO, the situation in Greenland offers a naked look at the true state of European sovereignty. Greenland is not just a distant, icy landmass. It is a real-world stress test for the concept of strategic autonomy, both for Denmark and for Europe as a whole. To be direct, the United States has had a continuous military presence in Greenland for a very long time. The installation, now known as Pitchafix Space Base, has been a critical component of America's missile defense and early warning system since the Cold War. Washington built, operated, and expanded this presence with almost no meaningful resistance. While Danish sovereignty is legally established, strategic control has long been shared in a profoundly one-sided arrangement. Therefore, when the American president voiced a desire to buy Greenland, he was not proposing a radical new idea. He was simply verbalizing a long-standing reality that previous American administrations had preferred to leave unstated. He said out loud what the political establishment in both Europe and America knew, but dared not acknowledge publicly. It was this very bluntness that triggered panic in European capitals. The panic was not rooted in the risk of losing the territory as the United States already exercises. De facto military control, but in the public stripping away of the moral and political veneer that sustains the European Union's image. The carefully constructed narrative of a sovereign and independent Europe was exposed as fragile. This incident highlights a characteristic tension in the transatlantic relationship. The European Union's leadership requires a narrative of dignity and sovereignty to maintain its political legitimacy with its own populace. It needs to project the image of Europe as an independent global actor with a powerful voice. The United States, particularly under certain political leadership, operates under a different set of incentives. An American president may not need to play the role of a polite and deferential ally. Instead, they may need shocking or tough statements to appeal to a domestic political base. These two political needs are in direct conflict, and it is Europe that is consistently placed in the more awkward position. The European Union's panicked reaction to the Greenland affair was not because the United States was being overly aggressive. It was because Europe was forced to confront its own lack of viable options. Not reacting would mean a loss of face. Reacting strongly would expose the fact that it possesses no real tools to counterbalance American power. Thus, the EU defaults to its familiar posture, verbal opposition, followed by practical acceptance. It is within this precise context that the European Union and Denmark are aggressively promoting a massive offshore wind power project in the North Sea as the symbol of their future energy independence. The stated goals are grand: begin phasing out Russian gas from 2027 and achieve approximately 300 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2050. However, a vast chasm exists between these ambitious slogans and the practical realities of energy systems. The fundamental weakness of both wind and solar power is their intermittency. They cannot provide the stable, continuous baseload electricity required to power a modern industrial economy. The wind does not always blow, and the sun does not always shine. The recent experience of Germany serves as a powerful lesson. Berlin once prided itself on its green energy transition, combining wind and solar power. But the silent partner in this policy was cheap Russian gas, which provided the necessary baseload stability. When that gas supply was severed, Germany was forced to revert to coal, the very fuel it had so vehemently condemned. This raises a series of difficult practical questions. If not Russian gas, what will the European Union use to bridge the energy gap between now and 2050? Will it be expensive, infrastructure-heavy LNG from the United States? And even if the ambitious wind power projects are completed on schedule, what will be the resulting price of electricity? Will European citizens and businesses be able to afford it? Who will ultimately bear the cost difference between green ideals and economic reality? These questions become even more pointed when examining the consequences already faced by Denmark. It has chosen a path of decisive opposition to Russia, but has not dared to push back against the United States. Copenhagen has opted for the politically safe route, but it is an economically risky one. When Western nations moved to seize Russian state assets, Moscow retaliated with targeted economic countermeasures. This included the effective nationalization of assets in Russia belonging to the Danish shipping giant Maersk. Retaliation was not accompanied by loud slogans or public threats. It was quiet and precise. What is most noteworthy is the almost complete silence on this matter in the Western media. When Russian assets are frozen, it is framed as an act of justice. When a major European company's assets are nationalized in response, the story largely disappears. This silence reveals a stark reality. The price for unrealistic political choices will eventually be paid. Whether sooner or later, in hard currency and in the erosion of true, meaningful autonomy,